The thunderous roar of the swollen river echoed through the valley as Samuel Jameson watched helplessly from the hillside, his mother's screams fading beneath the churning waters. It was May 1873, and the spring rains had transformed the usually peaceful Cottonwood Creek into a raging monster that devoured everything in its path, including the only family he had left in this world. Samuel fell to his knees, his hands gripping the muddy earth as the flood carried away not just his mother, but also the small ranch house they had built together after his father died in the war. At 25 years old, the skilled horseman and cattle driver now found himself completely alone, watching as everything he loved disappeared before his eyes. 3 days later, when the waters finally receded, Samuel rode his mud-caked horse down to what remained of their homestead. The cabin was gone, leaving only the stone chimney standing like a lonely sentinel over a graveyard of splintered wood and scattered possessions. His mother's body had been found 2 miles downstream, caught in a tangle of brush along with other debris from the flood. The neighbors had already buried her in the small cemetery outside of Silverville, the nearest town. Samuel dismounted and waded through the mud, his spurs clogged with silt and his boots sinking with each step. He'd spent most of his life on this patch of land, learning to rope and ride under his father's watchful eye, helping his mother tend the garden after his father never returned from Gettysburg. Now he had nothing, no home, no family, and seemingly no reason to stay. He found his mother's Bible half buried in the mud, its leather cover stained and pages swollen with water. Samuel picked it up carefully, remembering how she'd read from it every night, her faith unwavering even when his had faltered. He tucked it into his saddlebag, unsure why he was saving something he'd stopped believing in years ago. "You planning on rebuilding, or just standing there looking miserable all day?" Samuel turned to find a woman sitting atop a dappled mare, studying him with curious eyes. He'd never seen her before he would have remembered. She wore practical riding clothes, her wheat-colored hair pulled back in a simple braid that hung over her shoulder. There was something direct about her gaze that made him straighten his back despite his grief. "Not much point in rebuilding," he replied, his voice hoarse from days of shouting for his mother over the roar of the flood. "Nothing left to rebuild for." The woman dismounted in one fluid motion, leading her horse closer. "I'm Willow Summers. My father bought the old Miller place about 5 miles east last winter. We heard about what happened." She extended a gloved hand which Samuel reluctantly shook. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Samuel Jameson," he replied automatically, "and being sorry won't bring her back or rebuild my home." Willow nodded, seeming unfazed by his bitterness. "No, it won't, but 2 hands working is better than 1, and I've got experience with carpentry." She surveyed the destruction around them. "The chimney's still standing, that's a start." Samuel almost laughed at her audacity. "Miss Summers, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not staying. There's nothing for me here anymore." "Where will you go?" she asked, her blue eyes studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. He hadn't thought that far ahead. The cattle drive season was starting, and he could easily find work pushing longhorns north to Kansas. He'd done it before. "I'll find someplace." Willow nodded slowly, then bent down to pick up a mud-covered picture frame that had been his mother's. She wiped it clean with her sleeve, revealing a faded photograph of Samuel as a boy, sitting between his parents. "Sometimes the hardest place to stay is the place that hurts the most," she said, handing him the photograph. "But sometimes that's exactly where we need to be." Samuel took the picture, his throat tightening. "You don't know anything about me or what I need." "True enough," she agreed with a slight smile, "but I know what it's like to lose someone and want to run away from the pain." She glanced around at the devastation once more. "My father and I will be by tomorrow with some lumber. You can tell us to leave if you're still set on going." Before Samuel could protest further, she mounted her horse and rode away, leaving him standing in the mud with the ruined photograph in his hand, and an inexplicable sense that his plans had just been altered without his consent. Samuel spent that night in the barn that had survived the flood, albeit with a damaged roof and one wall partially collapsed. He'd managed to salvage some tools, a cast iron skillet, and a few other items from the wreckage. He built a small fire outside and cooked the provisions he'd brought from town, but found he had little appetite. As he lay on a pile of damp hay, looking up at the stars through the hole in the barn roof, Samuel contemplated his options. The sensible thing would be to sell the land, take what money he could get, and start fresh somewhere else. Kansas or Colorado, perhaps, somewhere without memories of his mother's laughter or the sound of her humming as she kneaded bread dough. Morning brought no clarity, only stiff muscles and the realization that he hadn't actually slept. Samuel fed and watered his horse, then began the grim task of salvaging anything else of value from the muddy remains of his home. He was knee-deep in debris when he heard the wagons approaching. True to her word, Willow Summers had returned, accompanied by a tall, white-bearded man who could only be her father and 2 wagons loaded with lumber, tools, and supplies. "Good morning, Mr. Jameson," Willow called out cheerfully, hopping down from the wagon seat. "I see you decided to stay after all." "For now," Samuel replied cautiously. "I'm just seeing what can be saved." Willow's father approached, extending a weathered hand. "Henry Summers, sorry about your loss, son. Flood's a terrible thing." Samuel shook the man's hand, noticing the firm grip and the honest compassion in his eyes. "Thank you for coming, but I haven't decided if I'm rebuilding yet." Henry nodded, understanding in his expression. "Well, we brought lumber and tools just in case. No harm in clearing the site while you make up your mind." And so they began. Against his better judgment, Samuel found himself working alongside the Summers family, clearing debris and salvaging what could be saved. By midday, they had made significant progress, and Willow unpacked a basket of food she'd brought along: cornbread, cold chicken, and a jar of preserved peaches. As they sat in the shade of the lone oak tree that had survived the flood, Samuel found himself studying Willow. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with a natural grace and confidence that seemed at odds with the frontier setting. Her hands, though clearly accustomed to work, moved with precision whether she was handling tools or serving food. "Why are you doing this?" Samuel asked abruptly. "You don't know me." Willow passed him a tin cup of water before answering. "My mother died when I was 16. Fever took her in less than a week." She spoke matter-of-factly, but Samuel could see the old pain in her eyes. "After she was gone, Pa and I stayed in Boston for a while, but everywhere we looked we saw her. So we came west, thinking distance would help." "Did it?" She shook her head. "Distance doesn't heal grief, Mr. Jameson. Purpose does." She gestured toward the cleared land. "When we first arrived at our place, it was in terrible shape. The previous owner had let it go to ruin. Fixing it up gave us something to focus on besides our loss." "So this is charity," Samuel said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Helping the poor grieving man so he doesn't do something foolish." To his surprise, Willow laughed. "No, Mr. Jameson, this is being a good neighbor, and maybe a bit selfish too. The more settled folks we have in this valley, the better chance we all have at building something that lasts." She stood, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Besides, Pa says you're known as one of the best horsemen in 3 counties, and we've got some colts that need breaking." Before Samuel could respond, Henry called them back to work and the conversation ended. But as the afternoon wore on, Samuel found his thoughts returning to Willow's words about purpose and grief. By sunset, they had cleared most of the debris and had begun marking out where the new cabin would stand, using the existing chimney as an anchor point. "We'll come back tomorrow if that suits," Henry said as they loaded their tools into the wagon. "Might bring a couple more hands from town if you're agreeable." Samuel looked at the progress they'd made and then at the determined set of Willow's jaw as she waited for his answer. Something shifted inside him, not healing, not yet, but perhaps the first acknowledgement that healing might someday be possible. "I'd be obliged," he said finally. "And I can pay for the lumber once I sell some cattle." Henry waved away the offer. We'll settle accounts when the work is done. No rush. As they drove away, Samuel stood watching until their wagons disappeared around the bend. Then he turned back to the cleared land, the standing chimney, and the setting sun painting the valley in gold and crimson. For the first time since the flood, he allowed himself to imagine a future here not the same as before, but perhaps not empty either. True to their word, the Summers returned the next day, bringing with them 3 men from town: the blacksmith, his son, and a wiry old carpenter named Jenkins, who claimed to have built half the structures in the territory. They set to work immediately, their experienced hands making quick progress on the cabin's foundation. Samuel found himself working alongside Willow, cutting lumber to the lengths Jenkins called out. She handled the saw with practiced ease, her movements efficient and precise. "You've done this before," Samuel observed as she marked another board. "Pa was determined I should learn every aspect of running a ranch," she replied. "Said he wouldn't always be around and a woman needs to know how to fend for herself in this country. Your father sounds like a wise man." Willow smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and caused an unexpected warmth in Samuel's chest. "He is, though I suspect he taught me everything because he had no sons to teach instead. From what I've seen, you could outwork most men I know," Samuel said honestly. Their conversation was interrupted by Jenkins calling for more nails, but Samuel caught the pleased look in Willow's eyes at his compliment. Throughout the day, he found himself watching her, the way she moved with purpose, the quiet authority she commanded without seeming to try, the easy way she laughed with the men while never allowing them to treat her as anything less than an equal. By the end of the week, the frame of the new cabin stood complete, larger than the original with a proper porch facing the creek. Samuel had contributed his share of the labor, but knew the work would have taken months without the help freely given by his neighbors. On Saturday evening, as the others were preparing to leave, Willow approached him with a parcel wrapped in cloth. "I found this recipe among my mother's things," she said, handing him the bundle. "Sourdough biscuits. Thought you might be tired of your own cooking." Samuel accepted the gift, unexpectedly touched by the gesture. "Thank you. It's been a while since I've had anything home-baked." "You're welcome." She hesitated, then added, "Pa and I usually attend services in town tomorrow morning. There's room in our wagon if you'd care to join us." Samuel stiffened, the invitation awakening memories of Sunday mornings with his mother, her gentle insistence that they attend church together even after he'd grown into a man with his own doubts. "I haven't set foot in a church since before the war," he admitted. "Not sure the Almighty and I are on speaking terms anymore." Instead of the judgment he expected, Willow simply nodded. "The invitation stands whenever you're ready, no pressure." She turned to go, then paused. "And Samuel, faith isn't just about church buildings or Sunday services. Sometimes it's about believing that tomorrow might be better than today, even when there's no evidence to support it." With that, she joined her father in the wagon, leaving Samuel to consider her words as he watched them drive away. That night, as he sat by his campfire eating Willow's biscuits, which were indeed excellent, Samuel found himself thinking not just of the past he'd lost, but of the future he might build, a thought that would have seemed impossible only days before. Over the next few weeks, work on the cabin progressed steadily. The walls went up, followed by the roof, windows, and doors. Samuel contributed what he could, selling off some of his remaining cattle to pay for supplies and working from dawn until dusk alongside the volunteers. Willow came most days, sometimes with her father, sometimes alone. Her presence became something Samuel looked forward to, her practical approach to problems and her unwavering optimism a counterbalance to his own tendency toward brooding silence. One afternoon, as they were installing the cabin's windows, a sudden summer storm blew in from the west. Thunder rumbled across the valley, and fat raindrops began to fall as they hurried to cover the tools and building materials. "We should wait it out," Samuel shouted over the increasing downpour, gesturing toward the barn. "It'll pass quickly." They ran for shelter, arriving at the barn door just as lightning split the sky and thunder cracked directly overhead. Inside, they stood dripping on the dirt floor, both breathing hard from the dash. "Well," Willow said, wringing water from her braid, "at least it's not a flood." The words hung between them, and for a moment Samuel felt the familiar grief rise up, but then, unexpectedly, he found himself laughing. "No, definitely not a flood." Willow's eyes widened at his laughter, then she joined in, the sound echoing in the rafters as the rain hammered on the roof above them. It felt strange to laugh, almost wrong given all that had happened, but also necessary like the release of pressure from a steam valve. When their laughter subsided, a comfortable silence fell between them. Samuel moved to check on his horse while Willow found a relatively dry spot to sit on a hay bale. "Tell me about your mother," she said softly. Samuel stilled, his hand on his horse's neck. "Why would you want to hear about that?" "Because she's part of who you are," Willow replied simply. "And because sometimes speaking of those we've lost keeps a piece of them alive." Samuel hesitated, then joined her on the hay bale, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Her name was Elizabeth. She came west with my father before I was born, leaving behind a comfortable life in Virginia." He found, to his surprise, that once he started speaking, the words came more easily. "She could make something grow in the poorest soil, had a way with plants that seemed like magic to me as a boy." "What did she look like?" Willow prompted when he fell silent. "Dark hair like mine, blue eyes." "She was small but strong, had to be to survive out here." Samuel smiled faintly at a memory. "She used to sing when she thought no one was listening, old songs from back east, church hymns sometimes. She sounds wonderful." "She was," Samuel agreed, his throat tightening. "She held everything together after my father died at Gettysburg. Never complained, never faltered. I don't know how she did it." "The same way you're doing it now," Willow observed. "One day at a time." Samuel looked at her, really looked at her, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the gentle understanding in her eyes, of the way her damp hair curled around her face. For a brief, disorienting moment, he wanted to reach out and touch her cheek, to see if her skin was as soft as it looked. The thought startled him, and he stood abruptly. "Storm's letting up. We should head back to the cabin site, see if anything needs attention." If Willow noticed his sudden awkwardness, she gave no sign, simply rising and following him out into the now gentle rainfall. But as they walked back to the construction site, Samuel found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, and of the unexpected direction his thoughts had taken. The cabin was completed by mid-July, a solid structure with 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and wide windows that caught the morning light. Samuel moved in with the few possessions he'd salvaged from the flood and the new furniture the townsfolk had helped him build. On the day of the cabin raising's completion, Henry Summers organized an impromptu celebration. Neighbors brought food and drink, someone produced a fiddle, and soon the newly built porch was crowded with people eating, drinking, and sharing stories. Samuel found himself constantly looking for Willow among the guests, his eyes seeking her out even when engaged in conversation with others. He finally spotted her near the corral, apparently deep in discussion with Jenkins, the old carpenter. As Samuel approached, he heard her saying, "And if you could spare a day next week, I'd be grateful for your expertise." Jenkins nodded. "Happy to help, Miss Summers. Just send word which day suits." The older man tipped his hat to Samuel as he walked away, leaving them alone by the fence, planning some carpentry at your place. Samuel asked. Willow nodded, turning to look out over the corral where his horses grazed. "Pa wants to expand the stable. We're expecting to add to our breeding stock this fall." "I hear you've got some fine Morgans." "We do," she confirmed, a note of pride in her voice. "Pa bought our first pair in Kentucky before we came west. He has an eye for good bloodlines." Samuel leaned against the fence beside her, conscious of the small distance between their hands resting on the top rail. "I never properly thanked you," he said quietly. She glanced at him, eyebrows raised in question, for everything, the help with rebuilding, but more than that. He struggled to find the right words. For not letting me run away. Willow's expression softened. You'd have come to the same decision on your own eventually. I'm not so sure about that. Samuel looked back toward the cabin, where people were laughing and talking on the porch he'd built with their help. I was ready to leave everything behind. You made me see there might be something worth staying for. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding that made Samuel's heart beat faster. Before either could speak, however, Henry's voice called out from the cabin. Willow, time we were heading home. The moment broken, Willow stepped back from the fence. Coming, Pa, she called, then turned back to Samuel. Congratulations on your new home. It's a fine cabin. Will I see you at the town social next Saturday? The question slipped out before Samuel could consider it, surprising him as much as her. A smile spread across Willow's face. Yes, she replied. I expect you will. She walked away to join her father, leaving Samuel by the corral with the strangest feeling that something significant had just occurred, though he couldn't have named exactly what it was. The following week passed slowly for Samuel. He busied himself with ranch work, mending fences damaged in the flood, tending to his remaining cattle, and breaking a spirited young colt he'd acquired in trade for some carpentry work in town. But his thoughts frequently turned to Willow and to the approaching town social. On Saturday, he found himself taking unusual care with his appearance, bathing in the creek and shaving meticulously before donning his best shirt and the vest his mother had made him for Christmas 2 years prior. He even polished his boots and dusted off his good hat before riding into town. Silverville was bustling when he arrived. The monthly social was held in the community hall adjacent to the church, a large open building with lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with food prepared by the townsfolk. A small band played in one corner, and several couples were already dancing in the cleared center of the room. Samuel greeted neighbors and friends as he made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations on his new cabin and fielding questions about his plans for the ranch. All the while, his eyes scanned the room for Willow. He finally spotted her near the refreshment table, deep in conversation with the shopkeeper's wife. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, her hair arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical braid. She looked, Samuel thought, like a ray of sunshine in human form, as if sensing his gaze, Willow looked up and saw him. A smile lit her face, and she excused herself from her conversation to make her way toward him. You came, she said when she reached him, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine pleasure. I said I would, Samuel replied, suddenly conscious of his clean-shaven face and polished boots. You look lovely, Miss Summers. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Thank you. And I think, after all we've been through, you might call me Willow. Willow, he repeated, liking the way her name felt on his lips. Would you care to dance? She glanced toward the dance floor, where couples moved in time to the lively fiddle music. I should warn you, I'm not particularly graceful. My dancing lessons in Boston didn't quite prepare me for frontier socials. I think we'll manage, Samuel said, offering his arm. I'm not exactly a dancing master myself. They joined the other couples on the floor just as the band shifted to a slower waltz. Samuel placed his hand respectfully at Willow's waist, took her other hand in his, and began to lead her through the simple steps. Despite her warning, Willow moved with natural grace, following his lead easily. As they danced, Samuel became increasingly aware of her, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the warmth of her hand in his, the way her eyes creased at the corners when she smiled. I heard you've been breaking that new colt of yours, she said as they circled the floor. The chestnut with the white blaze. Samuel nodded, impressed that she'd noticed his horse. He's coming along, spirited but not mean, just needs to learn who's boss. Pa says you have a way with difficult horses, says you whisper to them or some such. Samuel chuckled. No whispering required. Just patience and respect. Horses know when you're afraid or angry. They respond better to calm confidence. Is that true of people too, do you think? Willow asked, her eyes meeting his with that direct gaze he'd come to appreciate. Some people, he agreed. Though humans are considerably more complicated than horses. And yet, sometimes simpler, she countered. We all want similar things at heart: safety, purpose, connection. The music ended before Samuel could respond, and they joined in the polite applause for the musicians. As the band prepared for their next number, Henry Summers approached, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "Evening, Jameson. Mind if I steal my daughter for a dance?" Samuel stepped back, releasing Willow's hand. "Of course not, sir. Thank you for the dance, Miss Summers." "Willow," she reminded him with a smile before taking her father's arm. Samuel watched them move away, feeling oddly bereft at her absence. He made his way to the refreshment table, accepting a cup of punch from Mrs. Jenkins, the carpenter's wife. "She's a special young woman," the older woman commented, following his gaze to where Willow now danced with her father. "Yes, she is," Samuel agreed before he could think better of it. Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "It does my heart good to see you here tonight, Samuel. Your mother would be pleased." The mention of his mother brought a familiar pang, but not the devastating grief of before. "I hope so," he said quietly. "Oh, she would," Mrs. Jenkins assured him. "Elizabeth always said you had a good heart, even if you kept it guarded." She patted his arm. "Some things are worth the risk of opening it up again." Before Samuel could respond to this surprisingly direct observation, the older woman moved away to greet another guest, leaving him to consider her words as he watched Willow laugh at something her father said. Later that evening, as the social was winding down, Samuel found himself once more by Willow's side as they stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Beautiful night," Samuel commented, looking up at the constellations his father had taught him to recognize as a boy. "It is," Willow agreed, her voice soft in the darkness. "I never saw stars like this back east. Too many buildings, too much smoke." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the sounds of music and conversation from inside providing a distant backdrop to the night's natural symphony of cricket songs and rustling leaves. "I've been thinking," Samuel said finally. "Your father mentioned he has some colts that need breaking. I could help with that if he's still interested." Willow turned to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "Are you offering out of obligation? Because you don't owe us anything, Samuel." "No, not obligation," he assured her. "I'd like to help, and honestly, I've missed working with horses. It's always been what I'm best at." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Pa would appreciate the help, I'm sure, and—" She hesitated, then continued, "I'd enjoy having you around more often." The simple admission sent a warm current through Samuel's chest. "I'd enjoy that too," he said quietly. A call from inside interrupted the moment. Henry looking for Willow, ready to head home. As she turned to go, Samuel impulsively reached for her hand, holding it briefly. "Thank you for the dance," he said, "and for everything else." Willow squeezed his hand once before releasing it. "Good night, Samuel. I'll see you soon." As he watched her walk back inside, Samuel realized with sudden clarity that for the first time since the flood, he was looking forward to tomorrow and all the tomorrows that might follow. August brought scorching heat to the valley, the kind that shimmered above the grasslands and sent men and beasts alike seeking shade during the hottest hours. Samuel spent his mornings working his own land, rebuilding fences and clearing debris still left by the flood. In the afternoons, true to his word, he rode to the Summers ranch to help with their horses. The Summers place was impressive, a well-built two-story house with a large barn and several corrals. The land stretched for hundreds of acres, encompassing both grazing meadows and stands of pine and aspen. Henry had clearly invested considerable capital in the property, and his eye for quality extended to his horse breeding program. Samuel found himself enjoying the work immensely. Henry Summers was knowledgeable about horses, but welcomed Samuel's expertise, particularly with the more spirited young stallions. They developed an easy working relationship based on mutual respect, and a shared love of fine horseflesh. And then there was Willow. She was often present during Samuel's visits, sometimes working alongside the men in the corrals, other times busy with her own responsibilities around the ranch. But she always made time to speak with Samuel, to bring water or lemonade during the hottest part of the day, to ask his opinion on one of the horses, or share some observation of her own. They fell into a comfortable rhythm of conversation and companionship that gradually began to feel like something more, something neither of them named, but both seemed to recognize. Sometimes their hands would brush as they passed tools back and forth, or their eyes would meet across the corral, and Samuel would feel that now familiar warmth spread through his chest. One particularly hot afternoon, as Samuel worked with a difficult young stallion in the round pen, Willow watched from the fence, offering encouragement. The horse was beautiful but stubborn, reluctant to accept the saddle despite Samuel's patient approach. "He reminds me of you when we first met," Willow observed with a grin as the stallion tossed his head, resisting the halter yet again. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Stubborn and difficult, wary," she corrected, uncertain whether to trust or run. Samuel considered this as he slowly approached the horse again, speaking in low, soothing tones. "Maybe you're right," he conceded. "Though I like to think I wasn't quite as likely to kick someone's head in." Willow laughed, the sound causing the stallion to prick up his ears curiously. "Give yourself some credit. You were plenty prickly." After another hour of patient work, Samuel finally managed to get the saddle on the young horse and even sat on his back for a few moments before dismounting, ending the session on a positive note. He released the stallion into the larger paddock and joined Willow at the water barrel, both of them hot and dusty from the afternoon's work. "You did well with him," she said, passing him the dipper. "Most men would have tried to break his spirit rather than work with it." Samuel drank deeply before responding. "Breaking a horse's spirit just leaves you with a broken horse, finding a way to work together that creates something valuable." Willow studied him with those direct blue eyes. "Is that what you've learned these past months?" How to work together rather than alone, the question struck deeper than she perhaps intended, making Samuel pause. "I suppose I have," he admitted, "though I had a good teacher." Their gazes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Henry called from the barn, breaking the spell. "I should go help Pa with the feed," Willow said, pushing away from the fence. "Will you stay for supper? Maria made her special chicken stew." Maria was the Summers housekeeper, a widow from town who came 3 times a week to cook and clean. Her chicken stew was becoming legendary in Samuel's estimation. "I'd like that," he replied. "Thank you." Supper that evening was a pleasant affair, the 3 of them sitting around the Summers' large kitchen table while Maria fussed over them before heading home to town. Henry dominated the conversation with stories of his early days as a horse trader in Kentucky, making both Willow and Samuel laugh with tales of his youthful misadventures. As the meal concluded, Henry leaned back in his chair, regarding Samuel thoughtfully. "The Founders' Day celebration is coming up next weekend," he said. "Town council's organizing horse races as part of the festivities. Thought I might enter that bay gelding of mine, the one with the black points." "Thundercloud," Willow supplied. "He's fast, but his stamina isn't what it could be." "I was thinking," Henry continued, "that perhaps you might want to ride him, Samuel. You've got a lighter touch than most, and that horse responds well to you." Samuel was taken aback by the offer. Racing at the Founders' Day celebration was a prestigious affair, with considerable prize money and bragging rights at stake. For Henry to trust him with one of his valuable horses was a significant gesture. "I'd be honored," Samuel said sincerely, "though I haven't raced competitively in years." Henry waved away his concern. "It's like riding once you know how, you never forget. Besides, most of the local boys are all flash and no finesse. A steady hand like yours will make the difference." After supper, as Samuel prepared to leave, Willow walked him to the barn where his horse waited. The evening was cooler than the day had been, the first stars just becoming visible in the deepening blue of the sky. "Pa thinks highly of you," Willow said as they walked. "He doesn't trust his horses to just anyone." "I'm grateful for his confidence," Samuel replied. "And for his friendship these past months." "Yours too," he added, glancing at her profile in the gathering darkness. They reached the barn, and Samuel began to saddle his horse, aware of Willow watching him. When he finished, he turned to find her standing closer than he expected, her eyes serious in the lantern light. "Will you come to the church picnic after the races?" she asked. "Everyone brings food to share, and there's usually dancing in the evening." Samuel hesitated, the familiar resistance to church functions rising within him. "I'm not much for church gatherings," he said carefully. Willow's expression didn't change. "It's not about the church, Samuel. It's about the community, about being part of something larger than yourself." She took a step closer. "I'm not asking you to say prayers or sing hymns, just to be there with me." The last two words hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning beyond the simple invitation. Samuel found himself unable to refuse, not with Willow looking at him like that, like his answer mattered more than perhaps it should. "All right," he agreed. "I'll come." "With you?" Her smile was worth any discomfort he might feel at a church function. "Good," she said simply. Then, in a gesture that took him by surprise, she stood on tiptoe and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Ride safely." Before he could respond, she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Samuel standing beside his horse with his hand to his cheek and his heart hammering in his chest like a galloping stallion. Founders Day dawned clear and bright, the town of Silverville decked out in bunting and flags. The main street was closed to traffic, filled instead with stalls selling food, handcrafted items, and various games and entertainments. The horse races were scheduled for midday, with 6 events of increasing difficulty and prize money. Samuel arrived early, leading Thundercloud, the Summers bay gelding he would be riding. The horse was indeed magnificent, 16 hands of sleek muscle with intelligent eyes and a proud carriage. Samuel had worked with him several times over the past week, getting a feel for his gait and temperament. As Willow had noted, the horse was fast but sometimes lacked stamina on longer runs, something Samuel would need to manage carefully during the race. He found Henry near the registration table, discussing the race conditions with several other horse owners. Willow stood slightly apart, holding the reins of her own mount, a dappled mare Samuel recognized as her personal riding horse. "Good morning," he greeted them, tipping his hat to Willow, whose answering smile sent a now familiar warmth through him. "Perfect day for racing," Henry observed, clapping Samuel on the shoulder. "Thundercloud's in fine fettle, been saving his energy just like we discussed." They registered for the third race, a mile-long course that would take riders out of town, along the creek bed, and back to finish in front of the judge's stand. 8 riders were entered, including Clint Taylor, the sheriff's son, who was known for his aggressive racing style and who had won the event 2 years running. As they led the horses to the starting area, Willow fell into step beside Samuel. "Clint will try to box you in early," she warned in a low voice. "He did it to Pa last year. Watch your outside flank when you make the turn at the creek." Samuel nodded, appreciating both her knowledge and her concern. "I'll keep it in mind." "And remember what we discussed about Thundercloud's stamina," she continued. "Save his strength for the final stretch." "Yes, madam," Samuel replied with a smile. "Any other instructions?" Willow's expression turned serious. "Just one, win." Then, to his surprise, she reached up and straightened his collar, her fingers lingering briefly against the skin of his neck. "For luck," she explained, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Before Samuel could respond, the race officials called for the riders to take their positions. He mounted Thundercloud, settling into the saddle and feeling the horse's eager energy beneath him. As he guided the gelding to the starting line, he found himself scanning the crowd until he located Willow standing with her father, her blue dress making her easy to spot among the sea of onlookers. The official raised his pistol. "Riders ready." Samuel gathered the reins, leaning forward slightly. The pistol fired and they were off, 8 horses surging forward in a thunder of hooves and cloud of dust. Samuel kept Thundercloud just behind the lead pack, mindful of Willow's warning about the horse's stamina. Clint Taylor took an early lead, his flashy chestnut stallion stretching out ahead of the group. They raced through town, spectators cheering from both sides of the makeshift track, then out toward the creek that marked the turning point of the course. Samuel kept his focus on the rhythm of his horse, feeling the power in Thundercloud's stride and gauging when to ask for more speed. As they approached the creek turn, Samuel saw Clint Taylor glance back, noting Samuel's position. Just as Willow had predicted, as they rounded the bend, Clint deliberately drifted wide, forcing Samuel toward the outer edge of the track where the ground was softer and less favorable. Instead of fighting the maneuver, Samuel accepted it, dropping back slightly to avoid the worst of the soft ground, then cutting sharply inside as another rider created an opening. The move cost him a few lengths but saved Thundercloud's energy for the crucial final stretch. As they thundered back toward town, Samuel was running fourth, with Clint still in the lead but showing signs of pushing his horse too hard too early. The crowd's roar grew louder as they approached the final straightaway, and Samuel finally gave Thundercloud his head. The response was immediate and thrilling. The bay gelding surged forward, eating up the ground between himself and the leaders. They passed the third-place rider easily, then drew even with the second as they entered the town proper. Clint Taylor was still ahead, but his chestnut was beginning to falter, its stride shortening as fatigue set in. In contrast, Thundercloud seemed to gain energy from the crowd's excitement, his powerful legs stretching out in perfect rhythm. Samuel kept his body low over the horse's neck, moving with him rather than against him, urging him on with voice and gentle pressure rather than the whip that Clint was now employing desperately. 50 yards from the finish, they drew even with Clint's chestnut. For a brief moment, the two riders looked at each other, Clint's face contorted with effort and frustration. Samuel's calmly focused on the task at hand. Then Thundercloud found another gear, pulling ahead by a head, then a neck, then a full length as they flashed past the finish line to the wild cheers of the crowd. Samuel slowed Thundercloud gradually, praising the horse as they circled back toward the judges' stand. His heart was pounding with exhilaration, the thrill of the race still coursing through his veins. As he dismounted, he was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, Willow Summers foremost among them. "Magnificent riding," Henry exclaimed, clapping him on the back. "I knew you were the right man for Thundercloud. Did you see how he responded down the stretch? Beautiful, just beautiful." Samuel accepted the congratulations with a smile, but his eyes were searching for Willow. He finally spotted her making her way through the crowd, her face alight with excitement. "You did it," she cried when she reached him, impulsively throwing her arms around him in a quick hug before seeming to remember herself and stepping back. "That was incredible riding. The way you handled that turn at the creek, I had good advice," Samuel replied, unable to stop smiling at her enthusiasm. The official presentation followed, with Samuel receiving a blue ribbon and a cash prize that he immediately tried to give to Henry. "Nonsense," the older man refused. "The prize is yours. You earned it fair and square." He glanced at his daughter, a knowing look in his eye. "Though I suspect the victory might be sweeter than the money, eh?" Samuel followed his gaze to Willow, who was stroking Thundercloud's nose and speaking softly to the horse. "Yes, sir," he agreed quietly. "I believe it is." After the excitement of the race, the rest of the afternoon passed in a pleasant blur of congratulations and conversation. Samuel found himself the center of attention, with many townsfolk who had previously kept a respectful distance now approaching to chat or offer their good wishes. As promised, Samuel accompanied Willow to the church picnic that followed the town celebrations. Long tables had been set up in the shade of the cottonwood trees beside the white clapboard church. laden with dishes brought by the congregation: fried chicken, corn pudding, fresh baked bread, and pies of every description. To Samuel's relief, the atmosphere was more festive than religious, with families gathering to share food and company rather than engage in worship. He found himself seated between Willow and Mrs. Jenkins, with Henry across the table deep in conversation with the blacksmith about a new shoeing technique. "I hear congratulations are in order," Mrs. Jenkins said, passing Samuel a platter of chicken. "Henry's bay showed his quality today, and I'm told you rode magnificently." "The horse did the work," Samuel demurred. "I just stayed on and pointed him in the right direction." Mrs. Jenkins chuckled. "Such modesty. Your mother would be proud. She always said humility was a virtue too often lacking in men of ability." The mention of his mother no longer brought the sharp pain it once had, Samuel realized. Instead, there was a gentle warmth, a sense of her presence that felt almost comforting. She was right about most things, he agreed. Elizabeth had a gift for seeing the truth in people, Mrs. Jenkins continued, her eyes twinkling as she glanced between Samuel and Willow. "And for recognizing possibilities before they were apparent to others." Before Samuel could decipher this cryptic remark, Reverend Thompson, the local minister, called for everyone's attention. The picnickers fell silent as the Reverend stood to offer a blessing over the gathering. "Lord, we thank you for this bountiful food, for the fellowship we share, and for your many blessings upon our community. We ask that you continue to guide us in the days ahead, strengthening our bonds with one another and with you. In your name we pray, Amen." A chorus of amens followed, and conversation resumed as people turned their attention to the feast before them. Samuel, who had tensed slightly during the prayer, felt Willow's hand briefly touch his knee under the table, a small gesture of understanding that meant more to him than she could know. As the afternoon waned into evening, lanterns were lit, and the band that had played at the social the month before set up near the church steps. Soon couples were dancing on the grass, children racing between them in impromptu games of tag, and elders watching from benches arranged around the perimeter. "Would you care to dance?" Samuel asked Willow, who had been conversing with the schoolteacher's wife. She turned to him with a smile that made his heart skip. "I'd love to." They joined the other couples as the band played a lively reel. Samuel found himself laughing as they navigated the steps, Willow's hand warm in his, her blue eyes reflecting the lantern light. When the music shifted to a waltz, he drew her closer, their movements slowing to match the gentle tempo. "Thank you for coming today," Willow said softly as they circled among the other dancers. "I know church gatherings aren't your favorite. This isn't so bad," Samuel admitted. "Though I suspect the company has something to do with that." Willow's smile deepened. "Are you saying you enjoy my company, Mr. Jameson?" "Very much, Miss Summers," he replied, surprising himself with his boldness. "More than I ever expected to enjoy anyone's company again." Something shifted in her expression, a softening that made Samuel suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of her in his arms, of the way her gaze dropped briefly to his lips before meeting his eyes again. "Willow," Henry's voice interrupted the moment. "Mrs. Thompson is asking after that recipe you mentioned. Could you spare a moment?" Willow stepped back from Samuel, the spell broken. "Of course, Pa," she glanced at Samuel. "Will you excuse me?" "Of course," he echoed, releasing her hand reluctantly. "I'll be here." As Willow walked away with her father, Samuel moved to the edge of the dancing area, watching the couples sway to the music. He was lost in thought when a familiar voice spoke at his elbow. "She's special, that girl." Samuel turned to find Reverend Thompson standing beside him, the older man's eyes following Willow as she conversed with the minister's wife across the lawn. "Yes, she is," Samuel agreed cautiously, uncertain of the minister's purpose in approaching him. "I've known the Summers since they arrived last year," Thompson continued. "Fine people. Henry is a pillar of the community already, and Willow has a heart for service that reminds me of your mother." The comparison startled Samuel. "You knew my mother well," Thompson nodded. Elizabeth was a faithful member of our congregation. Even after your father passed, she never missed a Sunday." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "She worried about you, about the distance you put between yourself and your faith after the war." Samuel stiffened. "With all due respect, Reverend, my relationship with God or lack thereof is my own business." To his surprise, Thompson chuckled. "Indeed it is, my boy, indeed it is." The older man's eyes crinkled at the corners. "I'm not here to sermonize. Just to observe that sometimes the Lord works in unexpected ways. The flood that took your mother was a terrible tragedy, but look what's grown from that devastation." He gestured around the gathering. "New connections, new possibilities. Perhaps even new faith, though not necessarily the kind found within these church walls." Before Samuel could formulate a response, the Reverend clapped him on the shoulder. "Just something to consider. Now, I believe Miss Summers is looking for you, and I should see to my wife before she volunteers me for another committee." With that, he moved away, leaving Samuel to puzzle over his words. Indeed, Willow was making her way back through the crowd, her expression brightening when she spotted him. As she reached his side, the band struck up another waltz, and without a word, they moved back into each other's arms, resuming their dance as if the interruption had never occurred. This time, Samuel held her a fraction closer, his hand more certain at her waist. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about expanding my horse operation. The flood took most of my cattle, but there's good grazing land that would suit horses well." "What sort of operation are you considering?" Willow asked, her eyes alight with interest. "Training primarily. Breaking and schooling horses for others, maybe taking in some that need special handling." Samuel guided her through a turn, his movements confident. "Your father's been encouraging me in that direction, says there's need for a good horse trainer in these parts." "Pa's usually right about such things," Willow agreed. "And you have a gift with horses. I've seen it myself." "The thing is," Samuel continued, his heart beating faster, "starting something like that would mean committing to staying here long-term, putting down roots." He searched her face, looking for her reaction. "Building a future here." Understanding dawned in Willow's eyes, her expression softening. "And is that something you want, a future here?" The music swelled around them, but Samuel barely heard it, his focus entirely on the woman in his arms. "I think it might be," he said honestly. "For the first time since the flood, I can imagine it, a life here, a good life." What he didn't say, what he wasn't quite ready to put into words, was that she was at the center of that imagined future, her smile, her strength, her unwavering belief in possibilities. But something in Willow's expression suggested she heard the unspoken sentiment anyway. "I think," she said softly, her hand tightening slightly on his shoulder, "that would be a very good thing indeed, Samuel Jameson." They continued to dance, moving together in perfect harmony as the stars appeared overhead and lantern light cast golden patterns across the grass beneath their feet. September brought cooler temperatures, and the first hints of autumn color to the aspens in the hills above Silverville. Samuel threw himself into establishing his horse training business, converting part of his rebuilt barn into additional stalls, and constructing a round pen for schooling young or difficult horses. Word of his success with Thundercloud had spread, and several ranchers approached him about training their own animals. Henry Summers was his most vocal supporter, recommending Samuel to his wide network of acquaintances and even sending over 2 of his own young horses for Samuel to work with. But it was Willow who became his most frequent visitor. She often rode over in the late afternoons, sometimes bringing food or supplies, other times simply coming to watch him work with the horses. Their relationship continued to deepen, their conversations ranging from practical matters of ranch management to more personal topics, their hopes, their memories, their thoughts on everything from books to politics to the changing seasons. One crisp October afternoon, Samuel was working with a nervous young mare when he heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, he saw Willow riding toward the corral, her cheeks flushed from the cool air, a basket hanging from her saddle. "Don't stop on my account," she called as she dismounted. "I brought apple pie from Maria." Samuel continued the lesson, guiding the mare through a series of simple commands, aware of Willow watching from the fence. There was something comforting about her presence, a sense of rightness that made the work feel more meaningful somehow. When he finally released the mare into the paddock, Samuel joined Willow at the water barrel, gratefully accepting the tin cup she offered. "She's coming along nicely," Willow observed, nodding toward the young horse. "You've done wonders with her in just 2 weeks." "She's smart," Samuel replied, leaning against the fence beside her. "Most of them are if you give them the chance to show it." Willow smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Like people that way, aren't they? Given the right circumstances, most will surprise you with what they're capable of." Samuel studied her profile, struck once again by how she managed to see beyond the surface of things, whether horses, situations, or people. "You have an unusual way of looking at the world, Willow Summers." She turned to face him, her expression curious. "Is that good or bad?" "Decidedly good," he assured her. "Refreshing, even. You see possibilities where others might not." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the horses grazing in the afternoon light. Finally, Willow spoke, her voice contemplative. Pa's thinking of expanding again. "He's been offered a chance to buy the old Douglas place that adjoins our land to the north." She glanced at Samuel. "It would mean more horses, more work." "Sounds like a good opportunity," Samuel observed. "The Douglas place has excellent water access, if I remember correctly." Willow nodded. "It does. Pa mentioned he might need a partner in the venture, someone with horse sense to help manage the expanded operation." Her eyes met his, something unspoken in their depths. "Someone he trusts," Samuel stilled, understanding the implication. "Your father's considering me as a business partner?" "He is," Willow confirmed. "Though nothing's been decided. He wanted me to mention it, see if you might be interested before he approaches you formally." The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. Samuel had developed a genuine respect for Henry Summers as both a businessman and a man of integrity. Working with him in an official capacity would be a significant step up from Samuel's small training operation. "I'd be honored to discuss it with him," Samuel said honestly. "Though I'm not sure what I could bring to such a partnership besides my labor and expertise. I don't have much capital to invest." Willow's lips curved into a small smile. "Pa's not looking for capital, he has enough of that. He's looking for someone who shares his vision for building something that will last, someone who might." She hesitated, then continued, "Someone who might have a stake in the family's future." The implication hung in the air between them, unmistakable now. Samuel's heart began to beat faster as he realized what Willow and perhaps Henry was suggesting. "Willow," he began, turning to face her fully, "is your father—" "Pa thinks very highly of you," she interrupted, her cheeks coloring slightly. "He sees how hard you've worked to rebuild after the flood, how you've established yourself despite tremendous loss." She took a deep breath. "And he sees how you look at me when you think no one's watching." Samuel felt heat rise to his own face, but he didn't look away. "And how do I look at you?" Willow's eyes met his, direct and unflinching despite her blush. "The same way I look at you when I think no one's watching." The confession, simple and honest, struck Samuel with the force of revelation. He had known, of course, that his feelings for Willow had grown beyond friendship or gratitude. But hearing her acknowledge a reciprocal feeling made those emotions suddenly, vividly real. "I never expected this," Samuel said softly. "After the flood, I thought I'd lost everything worth having. I couldn't imagine feeling anything but grief ever again." He reached out, hesitantly taking her hand in his. "Then you showed up, stubborn and determined, refusing to let me give up." Willow's fingers curled around his, warm and certain. "I recognized something in you that day," she admitted. "A kind of pain I understood, and maybe something else too, a strength you couldn't see in yourself. You helped me rebuild more than just the cabin," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. You helped me find reasons to stay, to try again, to believe that life could still hold good things." Their gazes held, the moment stretching between them, full of unspoken feeling. Then, with a courage born of certainty, Samuel leaned forward and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise, a beginning, a confirmation of everything that had been growing between them since that first meeting by the flooded ruins of his home. When they parted, Willow's eyes were shining, her smile radiant in the golden afternoon light. "I should probably speak with your father," Samuel said, his hand still holding hers. Willow laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Yes, I imagine you should, though I suspect he won't be particularly surprised." As if on cue, they heard the sound of another rider approaching, Henry himself, coming to check on the training progress of his young horses. Samuel reluctantly released Willow's hand, but the connection between them remained, invisible but undeniable. "I'll speak with him today," Samuel promised quietly, "about the partnership and about us." Willow nodded, her expression serene but her eyes dancing with happiness. "I have a feeling it's going to be a very productive conversation." The meeting with Henry Summers went much as Willow had predicted. The older man listened thoughtfully as Samuel expressed interest in the business partnership, asked pertinent questions about Samuel's vision for the horse training operation, and discussed practical matters of profit sharing and responsibilities. Then, when the business talk was concluded, Samuel gathered his courage and broached the more personal subject. "Mr. Summers," he began, "there's something else I'd like to discuss with you, something about Willow." Henry's expression remained neutral, though Samuel thought he detected a glimmer of amusement in the older man's eyes. "I'm listening." "Sir, I've developed deep feelings for your daughter," Samuel said directly, figuring honesty was the best approach. "I believe she returns those feelings. With your permission, I'd like to court her properly." Henry was silent for a moment, regarding Samuel with a measuring gaze. Then, to Samuel's surprise, he chuckled. "Samuel, my boy, you've been courting my daughter since July, whether you knew it or not." He leaned back in his chair. "But I appreciate you coming to me like this. Shows respect." "Then you're not opposed?" Samuel asked, hardly daring to hope it could be this straightforward. "Opposed?" Henry repeated. "To my daughter finding happiness with a hard-working, honest man who treats her as an equal and looks at her like she hung the moon. No, Samuel, I am not opposed." His expression turned more serious. "But I will say this: Willow has a strong mind and a stronger heart. She chose to care about you when you were at your lowest. That kind of loyalty deserves loyalty in return." "Yes, sir," Samuel agreed fervently. "I would never take her faith in me for granted." Henry nodded, apparently satisfied. "Well then, I believe we have an understanding, both business and personal." He stood, extending his hand. "Welcome to the family, Samuel, unofficially for now." As they shook hands, Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a burden he hadn't fully acknowledged until it was gone. For the first time since the flood, perhaps even since losing his father years before, he felt a sense of belonging, of having found his place in the world again. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Samuel's life. The partnership with Henry Summers was formalized, with Samuel taking responsibility for the training program while Henry managed the breeding and business aspects. Their complementary skills made for a successful operation, with word spreading quickly about the quality of their horses. But it was his deepening relationship with Willow that brought Samuel the greatest joy. They spent as much time together as their respective responsibilities allowed, riding the boundaries of both properties, working side by side with the horses, sharing meals and conversations that lasted long into the evening. Samuel found himself opening up to Willow about things he'd never discussed with anyone, the horrors he'd witnessed during his brief time in the war, the complicated relationship he'd had with his father, the crisis of faith that had begun with his father's death and culminated in his mother's. "I used to believe God had a plan," he confessed one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. that everything happened for a reason, even the painful things. But then my father died, and I couldn't see the reason in that. And when the flood took my mother, he shook his head. If there is a God, his plan seemed cruel beyond understanding. Willow was silent for a long moment, her hand resting lightly on his. I don't pretend to understand God's plan, she said finally. When my mother died, I was angry too. She was a good woman who never harmed anyone. Her death seemed senseless. How did you keep your faith? Samuel asked, genuinely curious. Willow considered the question carefully. I stopped looking for meaning in the tragedy itself, she said slowly. Instead, I started looking for meaning in what came after and how we responded to the loss, in the choices we made in grief's wake. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the dying light. The flood was terrible. But look what's grown from it, not just a new home or a business partnership, but this. She squeezed his hand. Us. Samuel brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You're wiser than your years, Willow Summers, she smiled, a touch of mischief lighting her eyes. One of us has to be. As November arrived, bringing the first dustings of snow to the mountains above Silverville, Samuel found himself thinking increasingly about the future, not just the coming months, but years ahead. He imagined waking up each morning with Willow beside him, building a life and perhaps a family together, growing old on land they both loved. The thought no longer frightened him as it once might have. Instead, it filled him with a quiet determination to make that future a reality. On a crisp Saturday morning, Samuel rode into town with a specific purpose in mind. The jeweler, Mr. Peterson, had received a shipment of new stock from Denver, and among the items was a ring Samuel had commissioned weeks earlier, a simple gold band set with a small sapphire that reminded him of Willow's eyes. After concluding his business with Peterson, Samuel stopped by the general store to pick up supplies. As he was loading his purchases onto his horse, he heard someone call his name. Turning, he saw Reverend Thompson approaching, his expression friendly. Good morning, Samuel, the minister greeted him. Fine day, isn't it, despite the chill? Morning, Reverend, Samuel replied, nodding politely. It is indeed. I understand congratulations might soon be in order, Thompson said with a knowing smile. Mrs. Jenkins mentioned she saw you coming out of Peterson's shop with a mighty pleased expression. Samuel felt heat rise to his face. Small towns and their gossip networks never ceased to amaze him. News travels fast, he observed dryly. Thompson chuckled. It's Silverville's most cherished tradition. His expression softened. Your mother would be pleased, Samuel. She always hoped you'd find happiness again after all you'd been through. The mention of his mother brought a familiar pang, but it was gentler now, more bittersweet than raw. I like to think she would, Samuel agreed. Though I doubt she ever imagined it happening quite this way. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Thompson said, not unkindly. Then, seeming to sense Samuel's discomfort with the religious reference, he added, or if you prefer, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Samuel found himself smiling despite his usual wariness around the minister. That it does, Reverend, that it does. As he rode home with the ring secure in his pocket, Samuel's thoughts turned to how he would propose. He wanted the moment to be special, meaningful, something worthy of Willow and the journey they'd taken together. An idea began to form, inspired by their first meeting by the flood-ravaged ruins of his homestead. It would require some preparation and perhaps some help, but with December approaching and the first real snowfall likely any day, he would need to act quickly. The following week, Samuel enlisted Henry's aid in keeping Willow occupied for a full day while he prepared his surprise. With help from Mrs. Jenkins and her husband, he transformed the area around the now rebuilt cabin, hanging lanterns from the porch rafters, setting up a small table with a proper tablecloth, and preparing a meal that, while simple, represented his best culinary efforts. As dusk fell, bringing with it a gentle snow that dusted the landscape like sugar, Samuel heard the approach of Willow's horse. His heart hammered in his chest as he lit the last of the lanterns, their golden light creating a warm glow against the gathering darkness. Willow's expression when she rode into view was everything he'd hoped for, surprise giving way to delight as she took in the transformed setting. She dismounted slowly, her eyes moving from the lantern-lit porch to Samuel standing beside the table, dressed in his best clothes. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Samuel crossed to her, taking the reins of her horse and securing them to the hitching post before turning back to her. "I wanted to show you something," he said, offering his arm. Willow took it, allowing him to lead her to the porch. "It's beautiful," she said, looking around at the lanterns and the table set for two. "But what's the occasion? Do you remember the first time you came here?" Samuel asked, gesturing toward the spot where the flood had destroyed his original home. Everything was in ruins. "I was ready to leave, to give up on this place entirely." Willow nodded, her eyes reflecting the lantern light. "I remember. You asked me then where I would go," Samuel continued, "and I had no answer because I wasn't thinking about going towards something only away from the pain." He took both her hands in his. "You helped me see that running away wouldn't heal anything, that sometimes the hardest place to stay is exactly where we need to be." He led her to the edge of the porch, where they could look out over the property, the barn with its new addition, the corrals where his growing herd of training horses now rested for the night, the creek that had once destroyed everything now flowing peacefully under a light dusting of snow. "You helped me rebuild, Willow, not just the structures but my belief that life could be good again, that I could have a home, a purpose." He turned to face her fully. "That I could have love." Willow's eyes glistened with unshed tears as Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew the small velvet box. Dropping to one knee on the porch, he opened it to reveal the sapphire ring gleaming in the lantern light. "Willow Summers, I love you with everything I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For one heart-stopping moment, Willow was silent, her hand pressed to her mouth. Then she nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Samuel, I will." With hands that trembled slightly, Samuel slid the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of all that was to come, a lifetime of moments like this one, of challenges faced together, of joy shared and multiplied. When they finally parted, Willow looked down at the ring on her finger, then back at Samuel with a radiant smile. "It's perfect," she said. "Like this night, like you." Samuel laughed softly. "I'm far from perfect, as you well know. Perfect for me," she clarified, touching his cheek gently. "And that's all that matters." They sat down to the dinner Samuel had prepared, talking and laughing in the lantern light as snow continued to fall gently around the cabin. Later, they moved inside, where Samuel had built a fire in the hearth, the same stone chimney that had stood as the only remnant of his old life, now incorporated into the new home they would soon share. As they sat before the fire, Willow nestled against Samuel's side, he found himself filled with a profound sense of gratitude. The path that had led them here had been marked by loss and grief, but also by courage, kindness, and ultimately, love. "What are you thinking about?" Willow asked, looking up at him with those perceptive blue eyes. Samuel smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I was thinking that sometimes, when everything seems lost, we find something we never knew we were looking for." Willow's answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I think," she said softly, "that might be what faith truly is." And as they sat together in the warm light of the fire, watching snow fall beyond the windows of the home they had rebuilt together, Samuel found that, for the first time in years, he was inclined to agree. Samuel and Willow were married on Christmas Eve, 1873, in the small white church in Silverville. Despite Samuel's previous reluctance regarding church functions, it seemed fitting, somehow a symbol of how far he had come in rebuilding not just his home but his heart. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, the church decorated with pine boughs and red berries, candles glowing in every window. Willow wore a dress of ivory silk that had been her mother's, altered by Mrs. Jenkins to fit her perfectly. Samuel, standing at the altar with Henry as his best man, thought she had never looked more beautiful than she did walking toward him on her father's arm, her eyes never leaving his. Reverend Thompson kept the service brief, seeming to understand Samuel's lingering discomfort with religious formality. Instead of a lengthy sermon, he spoke about love's power to heal and transform, about the courage it takes to open one's heart after loss, and about the community that had come together to support two people on their journey toward each other. When it came time for the vows, Samuel's voice was steady, filled with certainty as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Willow for all the days of his life. And when he slid the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, he felt a sense of rightness that transcended words. The celebration afterward was held at the Summers Ranch, the large front room cleared for dancing, tables laden with food prepared by seemingly every woman in the county. Lanterns and candles cast a golden glow over the gathering, and the falling snow outside only added to the magical quality of the evening. As tradition demanded, Samuel and Willow shared the first dance, moving together in perfect harmony as their friends and neighbors watched with approving smiles. "Happy, Mrs. Jameson?" Samuel asked softly as they circled the floor. Willow's smile was radiant. "More than I can say, Mr. Jameson." She glanced around at their guests, then back to him. "Look at all these people. They came together for us, just as they did to help rebuild after the flood. There's something powerful in that, don't you think? In community." Samuel nodded, once again struck by her ability to see the deeper meaning in things. "Your father told me once that the more settled folks we have in this valley, the better chance we all have at building something that lasts," he recalled. "I think I understand what he meant now." The dance ended, and others joined them on the floor, Henry leading Mrs. Jenkins in a surprisingly spry two-step, the blacksmith and his wife, young couples and old, all moving to the fiddle music that filled the room with joy. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Henry drew Samuel aside, pressing a folded document into his hand. "Wedding present," he explained gruffly. "From me to both of you." Samuel unfolded the paper to find a deed transferring ownership of a significant portion of the Summers Ranch, including the newly acquired Douglas property, jointly to Samuel and Willow. "Sir, I can't accept this," Samuel protested, stunned by the generosity of the gift. "It's too much." Henry waved away his objection. "It's not charity, son. It's planning for the future. That land will be Willow's inheritance anyway, and I'm not getting any younger. Better to see you two make something of it while I'm still around to enjoy the results." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Besides, I expect grandchildren someday, and they'll need room to grow." Samuel was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift and the acceptance it represented. Finally, he extended his hand. "Thank you, Henry. Not just for this, but for everything, for welcoming me into your family, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." The older man clasped his hand firmly. "You make my daughter happy. That's thanks enough." He glanced across the room to where Willow was laughing with some of the younger women. "Elizabeth would be proud of the man you've become, Samuel. I want you to know that." Later that night, after the last guests had departed and they had said their goodbyes to Henry, Samuel drove the sleigh through the gently falling snow to the cabin they would now share as husband and wife. He had spent the past week preparing it for Willow's arrival, adding feminine touches to the rustic interior curtains at the windows, a proper bedstead with a feather mattress, a rocking chair by the hearth. As the sleigh crested the hill overlooking the property, Samuel drew the horses to a halt, wanting Willow to see their home from this vantage point. In the moonlight, with snow blanketing the land and smoke curling from the chimney where he'd left a fire banked, it looked like something from a fairy tale, peaceful, welcoming, full of promise. "It's beautiful," Willow said softly, her hand finding his beneath the buffalo robe that covered their laps. "It's home," Samuel replied, the word holding a depth of meaning it hadn't possessed in years. Our home. When they reached the cabin, Samuel lifted Willow from the sleigh and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing as he narrowly avoided bumping her head on the doorframe. Inside, the fire had kept the cabin warm, its light casting a golden glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. Willow moved through the rooms, touching things gently: the curtains, the quilts on the bed, the cookware arranged neatly on shelves Samuel had built. "You thought of everything," she said, turning to him with shining eyes. "I wanted it to feel like yours as much as mine," Samuel explained, suddenly a bit nervous now that they were alone as husband and wife. "I know it's not as grand as your father's house, it's perfect," Willow interrupted, crossing to him and placing her hands on his chest. "Because it's ours, because we'll build our life here together." Samuel drew her into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, at how completely she had transformed his world in the span of a few months. "I love you, Willow Jameson," he murmured against her hair. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of tenderness and something more, a promise of the night to come. "Show me," she whispered, and in the warm glow of the fire, with snow falling gently outside and the whole of their future stretching before them, Samuel did exactly that. Spring came early to the valley in 1874, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil. The creek that had once brought such devastation now nourished the land, running clear and strong between its banks. Samuel and Willow settled into married life with a naturalness that surprised them both. Their partnership extended beyond the personal, to the professional, Willow proving to have as good an eye for horse flesh as her father, while Samuel's reputation as a trainer continued to grow throughout the territory. They expanded the operation steadily, adding more corrals and a larger stable to accommodate the increasing number of horses brought to them for training. By April, they had hired 2 young men from town to help with the daily work, allowing Samuel to focus on the more challenging cases and Willow to manage the business aspects. One warm evening in May, almost exactly a year after the flood that had changed everything, Samuel and Willow sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of pink and gold. Samuel had his arm around his wife's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Willow asked, her voice contemplative. "If the flood hadn't happened, or if I hadn't ridden by that day and found you in the ruins?" Samuel considered the question seriously. "I think about it often, actually. How close I came to leaving this place, to giving up on everything." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best, though that's hard to see when we're in the middle of the storm." Willow nodded, her hand finding his. "I have something to tell you," she said, a new note in her voice that made Samuel look down at her questioningly. "Something important." She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, holding it there as she met his eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Samuel. In November, Dr. Miller says." For a moment, Samuel couldn't speak, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion so powerful it left him breathless. Then he gathered Willow into his arms, holding her carefully as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hoarse with feeling. "Our baby." Willow's eyes glistened with happy tears as she nodded. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased," Samuel laughed, the sound full of wonder. "Willow, I'm—" Words failed him, and he simply held her closer, his heart too full for speech. They sat together as darkness fell, talking quietly about the future, about the nursery they would prepare in the small second bedroom, about names they liked, about the kind of parents they hoped to be. As the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, Samuel found himself thinking of his mother, wishing she could have known Willow, could have seen the life they were building together, could have held her grandchild in her arms. And then, in a moment of clarity that seemed to come from beyond himself, Samuel realized that perhaps she did know in some way beyond his understanding. The thought brought an unexpected peace, a sense of connection that transcended the boundaries between life and death. Samuel. Willow's voice brought him back to the present. What are you thinking about? You went far away for a moment. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. I was thinking about my mother, actually, about how much she would have loved you and about how. He hesitated, then continued, about how perhaps she does even now. Willow's expression softened with understanding. I believe she does, she said simply. I believe love doesn't end with death. It changes form, perhaps, but it remains. Samuel considered this, finding comfort in the thought. You know, he said slowly, when I was a boy, my mother used to tell me that faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting even when we don't understand. He looked out at the starlit valley, at the land that had been devastated and now flourished again. I think I'm beginning to see what she meant. Willow leaned against him, her presence a tangible reminder of all he had found when he thought everything was lost. Faith takes many forms, she observed. Faith in God, in others, in ourselves, in life itself and its capacity for renewal. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, the promise of new life growing between them, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that had begun in loss but led to love, that had started in devastation but resulted in creation. If that wasn't a kind of miracle, he didn't know what was. And perhaps, he thought, that was what faith truly meant, not blind belief in things unseen, but recognition of the wonder present in the world around us, in the connections we forge with others, in the resilience of the human spirit when faced with life's deepest sorrows. I love you, Willow Jameson, he said, the words simple but containing multitudes. Her answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. And I love you, Samuel Jameson, today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing silent witness to the promise exchanged between two people who had found in each other the courage to rebuild not just homes and livelihoods, but hope itself, the most precious foundation of all. Elizabeth Rose Jameson was born on a clear November morning in 1874, her lusty cries filling the cabin as the first light of dawn streaked the eastern sky. She had her mother's blue eyes and her father's dark hair, and from the moment Samuel first held her in his trembling hands, she owned his heart completely. She's perfect, he whispered, carefully passing the swaddled infant to Willow, who looked exhausted but radiant after the long night of labor. Absolutely perfect, Elizabeth, Willow said softly, confirming the name they had chosen months earlier. After your mother, Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his daughter's tiny fist as it poked free from the blanket. In that moment, watching his wife and newborn daughter, Samuel felt a circle closing, not an ending but a completion. The flood that had taken his mother had also, through a series of events no one could have predicted, led him to Willow and ultimately to this new life they had created together. Thank you, he said, pressing a kiss to Willow's temple. For everything, for her, for us. Willow leaned against him, her eyes never leaving their daughter's face. We did this together, Samuel, all of it rebuilding after the flood, creating this home, making this family. She looked up at him, her expression tender, and we'll continue to build day by day for her and for each other. Samuel nodded, knowing it was true. They would continue to build their home, their horse training business, their family. There would be challenges ahead, of course, and sorrows as well as joys. But they would face them together, strengthened by the love they had found in each other and by the faith they had rediscovered along the way. As the sun rose fully over the valley, bathing the cabin in golden light, Samuel Jameson looked at his wife and daughter and knew with absolute certainty that he had found his way home at last. And somewhere, he believed, his mother was smiling.